if you're joining us late, I'm the director of the Engagement Journalism Program. I'll be moderating this with Jeff Jarvis. You know, these are 4 of our absolutely wonderful alumni. And a question that I get a lot is, which is a fair question, is like, okay, I understand that whole engagement thing, but like, what do people actually do when they're like on the job and working? So we thought that nobody could better answer that question than these 4. So we thought we'd kind of kick it off instead of Jeff and I giving introductions, that maybe you could start by each of you telling us a little bit about yourselves and about kind of your current role and, you know, what an engagement job looks like, basically. Yeah.
Mekdela, want to start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Mekdela Maskal. And yeah, I was in the 2019 class at Social J, now Engaged Journalism. And I am the engagement editor at an organization called Covering Climate Now. And we partner with newsrooms to encourage and strengthen their climate reporting. And so for me, it looks a lot like one, helping our partners engage with their audiences, but also using engagement strategies for us as an organization to engage with our partner newsrooms and the journalists at those newsrooms. And so, I mean, it's a lot of using a lot of the theories that we learned in the program and applying them to everything from what we do and ask on social to how we use our newsletters to engage with our audiences, to also bringing the through line of engagement through like all of the projects that we do. And that I think is something I've learned like to do more of and to advocate for through the opportunities that I've gotten in newsrooms. So I guess that's a good intro. And then me as my background in our program, I focused on food apartheid and food justice in Brooklyn. And I did an engagement project with local food justice leaders through events and photography.
Lexi?
Hi. So I'm Alexandria, but I go by Lexi for short, all the Social J or Engagement Now know me as Lexi. I'm currently the audience engagement producer at The Intercept. And I've actually started there back in December, so I'm still fairly new. But my role there is mostly about audience growth. So coming up with strategies to broaden our audience across social media to hopefully get subscribers, because we are a nonprofit newsroom. But before that, I've worked several engagement jobs. And one thing that I told Carrie, and I actually tell a lot of people, is that it depends on the newsroom what engagement means to them. So I've had different newsrooms have engagement just be about audience growth or, you know, analytics, but then other newsrooms are very much like Mekdela works on engagement strategies to you know, work with communities. So that's a little bit about me now. While I was in the program, I was part of the 2017 class. I focused on community reporting for formerly incarcerated women. And that was my first time doing, you know, like in-depth community reporting, and it really brought back my passion for journalism. I spent some time away from the industry before that. So yeah, Social J brought me back to the industry. So yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Isadora.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me, by the way. I'm Isadora. I'm from the 2019 class. I studied with Mekdela and with Beatrix. I am an engagement producer of Retro Report. For those who don't know, we make short documentaries, historical documentaries that give context to whatever is dominating the news. So, which means last year we were mostly doing coverage on COVID and how COVID was affecting communities of color mostly. And I stepped into this job, everybody had already gone remote. So I've never worked from the office with them. So it was really interesting, challenging, but also it taught me a lot of what you need to do in those first moments to bond with your organization, with the journalists that are going to be you're going to be helping, right? Because and this is something I learned from watching several sessions and conferences. Like, as an engagement person, once you're going to a news organization, you need to have this very clear with your journalists that you were there to help them, to help their work be seen. So in my first year, I was mostly focusing on that, trying to get more eyes on the work that we were doing and trying to make our documentaries be a starting point for bigger conversations that were already being had, and we wanted to be a part of the conversation. So I did 2 events. We're going to our 3rd event now. We also decided to create a product serving teachers. So I was involved from the very early beginning, of course, coming from the engagement school. If you want to create a product, you have to have all this information about the community you're serving. So it was like months of interviews, months of community listening, and using Facebook groups and using everything that we learned to come up with a service for teachers that came from and I surveyed hundreds of teachers, and that was the result. So for me at Retro Report this year, last year was more about introducing engagement strategies, helping producers, like introduce crowdsourcing when it was appropriate, or, meeting them halfway through the production stage to then, think about strategies to make sure that the right people would watch the product, and then also coming up with new services and creating social media strategy for every platform. We're on all platforms. Our audiences are totally different in each platform, so you need different strategies for those. And as a one-person shop, has been super interesting to try things out, and I've been having a lot of support from leadership. And just a little bit about myself, I'm from Brazil. For my capstone, I worked with the Latina immigrant community who was at risk of domestic violence, which during the pandemic like skyrocketed. And my capstone focused on community building and in-person events, which was one of my strengths coming to Retro Report, but it was a pandemic year, so I had to kind of switch gears. But yeah.
B.
Hi, I'm Bea Lockwood. I'm the community engagement editor at Reuters. I sit on the social team, and my role is really to help the digital team and the newsroom as a whole better understand who our readers are and how they are responding to our journalism. So I spend a lot of time looking at audience data to inform our strategies, and also putting it into action and experimenting with new ways of reaching readers. So that could be Reddit AMAs or crowdsourcing callouts or anything in between. And then just generally pitching in with putting the news out, writing and editing tweets, making graphics, doing live video, and just pitching in where I'm needed. I am a 2019 grad of the engagement journalism program, and I focused on communities affected by the justice system.
Thank you. I'm still on fire from the last panel. And yes, time for president. It's burning down around us anyway. So I guess what I want to start with is I call you graduates, you alums, the people who carry the torch of what engagement journalism is. And I've seen, Carrie and I have both seen you all do that brilliantly. But that's among the friends and among people who know what's what. I'm curious about how you relate to other people in the newsroom who probably scratch their heads saying, what is this thing? What do you do? What value does it have? Why are you here? And then maybe what can I learn from you? What has been good and bad, safe space, about your dealings with veteran journalists wherever you are? Anybody who wants to start?
I can jump in. We have a fellow retro reporter in the audience, so he knows that our producers, oops, I think you lost me. There are people who came from broadcasting, people who like won, awards, and they don't think they're doing anything wrong, and they're not doing anything wrong by any means. It's just like the industry has changed so much over the years, and they've been focusing on the journalism that they're doing. So one thing that I learned coming, and I talked a little bit about that. And I also asked a bunch of people in the industry before starting my job, like, what should I do? Because I knew I would encounter those people, right? And I am from, I'm a daughter of journalists, so I also know a lot of that ego. So how do you handle that? Well, first of all, you just need to have a lot of emotional intelligence, and it could sound like HR talk, but your interpersonal skills, those things that you're always saying, but like you don't really know what that means. Well, you kind of need that for this job, because you're gonna have people who are in different stages of their careers, who have different levels of familiarity with what engagement is. There's some people who are like super excited about engagement, but they think engagement is something else. They think that it's about being a PR, like shooting emails, like, okay, so we have this video now, can you shoot the emails to those people you found? And it's not really about that, right? You have to have a strategy if you're cold calling people. So, it's really about going in, and just like we need to know our audience and the communities we're serving, we need to know our journalists. So you need to know where every one of them stand, like what are they curious about, what are their resistance. Try to learn the best way to talk to them, and never this is something that Rubina from, I think she's now at the New York Times, told me, kind of like learn how they talk and use the words that they use, right? So you come audience, we make documentaries, so we're gonna say viewers, right? And also, don't ever assume that because something is very obvious to you, like I come from having great experience using Facebook groups for my engagement projects, but you cannot assume that any producer is going to be okay with using their Facebook profile, join a community or a Facebook group and ask questions or listen in or message the admin and tell them about this project. Some people are like, I don't want to have my photo in there, I'm going to create another profile. And I was like, yeah, that's not good, because you're trying to build trust. So if you're gonna come up with this profile that looks like a bot profile, that's gonna backfire. So you really need to take the time to talk to people and understand where they're coming from, and it's gonna be hard. Like I've had situations in which you have people who have been working for the New York Times for 30 years, and then they're working with you, and you want to tell them that your headline could be better, but how could you say that? Like, I'm a graduate, I'm just arrived, so you're not wrong. Like, right, I'm not wrong, because I know about SEO and all these other things. So you need to learn how to communicate that in a way that doesn't create friction, because if you create friction with the journalist, that's just like the end of it. So a lot of emotional intelligence and knowing people and really knowing them.
Wisely said. Anybody else on this question?
I think I took for granted what you're saying, Jeff, when I was in the program, because I was new to journalism internally, right? Like I came to the program as a person who consumed journalism and thought that there was something wrong, but didn't really know what the inner workings of the industry looked like and the reasons for the issues that I felt as a consumer of news. And so in the program, I think I really took for granted like how far ahead the program was of the industry. Even when Carrie would say like, you guys like are gonna have no problem, like you're gonna be one of the few people who have all of these skills, and you're gonna be persuading people. And I'd be like, really? I don't really. And then, it's true. And I think for me, it's been a balance between having the patience to express the reason and the path and the new pathways, and because it takes a lot of, in my opinion, like historical context to explain to folks like why this new approach is necessary. That I think is really important, but you don't have the time always to do that work when you're trying to get something done. And so for me, it's a balance between like, what can I fight for right now? Like what can we do right now? And then keeping the long shot like in mind always. Like what's my main goal? But like, what can I do now? That for me, one, like just keeps me sane and motivated. And two, like, I think also just helps get things done. And then I think for me, what's helpful is to come to conversations and ideas with questions, like the same way that we do with engaging with audiences. Like I use that same frame of mind when I'm talking to colleagues about new types of work, is to ask them those kinds of questions. So like when we're even thinking about what, to initiate a new project or a story, and they'll say, what do we think we should do next? I'd be like, well, have we asked them what we should do next? And then that's just like, if there's no answer there, then that's the answer, right? Like, how are we coming up with that plan when we haven't asked the people that this is for? So those kinds of questions I try to remember to ask. Yeah.
Lexi B, do you want to add anything or?
Yeah, I was just gonna add that, so before I was at the Intercept, I was at CBS. And so that's, like a legacy organization. You would think like it's super hard to get them in engagement, which it was, but working with like talent, like whether it was CBS or the Intercept, like reporters and talent, they're already involved in social media on their own accounts. So I guess not the problem or the encouragement would be to get them engaged through the news organization's accounts, because they're already crowdsourcing sources. They're already engaging with people who are reading and watching. So for me, it was just kind of like at CBS, I haven't done it yet at the Intercept, but at CBS, it was more or less encouraging people like, let's do that on the CBS social accounts. Like you're already doing it, but let's bring it to the news organization. So it was just like an experience of where people were already doing the engagement journalism part, but like, let's do it together.
I would add that in, I think, mainstream legacy journalism, social is a really great place to do this kind of thing. It can kind of be almost a Trojan horse because, first of all, it's sometimes not taken super seriously, and also that the nature of the platforms are experimental and it's generally new territory. So I've had a lot of success playing around and trying new things, and I'm lucky to have a manager who encourages that. But I think that doing audience work is a really great way to introduce the ideas in a low stakes way. And I've been able to introduce some story forums and ideas at 100-and-something-year-old news organization by taking that approach.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, there's a good question in the chat. I mean, that is something we talk about a lot, about how, the word engagement can encompass, like Lexi said, sort of this wide range of, different types of things, from reporting and crowdsourcing to more of the audience growth and like social media. Does anyone else want to kind of talk about that, like in with the chat, about how you sort of see that landscape, or like what kind of freedom you have to kind of move between those roles, kind of following on what Bea just said, because that seems like a really important element to kind of understand of this.
I think that I totally agree with the person who put it in the chat. I'm not going to try to say their name incorrectly. I think that it gets conflated a lot. And I think one is understanding if the conflation is happening because there's just not an understanding of what engagement in social is. And so that's why it's always just thought of as like the amplification and promotion of reporting that happens on social. But then I think there's also the idea that the amplification and promotion on social is what generates audience growth, and engagement doesn't. So like we need to invest in the former more than the latter. So I think for me, it's been helpful to slowly enhance just like all of my team's education in what engagement on social does and how it does influence audience growth in the end, and more engaged audience growth and audience growth that sticks with you, that isn't just there for a specific story and leaves, but is there in the long run because you've put in the time and energy to ask them questions and deliver the information that they've asked for. So that's been really helpful for trying to really separate those two things and have the depth of understanding of the engagement as much as the amplification part.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that, or we can go on? I mean, how do you all feel too about kind of, I mean, I sort of took this as an occasion to just kind of reflect on, you know, how we felt like the field, I mean, of engagement and journalism, you know, is changing, and kind of where you see this going. I mean, what are some of your thoughts on that? I mean, have things changed even since, you know, you graduated, although it was at different times for all of you? And I mean, where do you see, like, what do you see for the future? I mean, I know that's sort of hard to predict, but in terms of just where you think engagement journalism is going to be over the next few years.
I'll start. Since I graduated in 2017, and at that time, you know, social journalism and engagement journalism was still kind of new-ish. Like, I think it was like becoming more accepted, but people didn't know what to call it. And, you know, but now, like in 2021, like everybody's doing engagement journalism. Like they have engagement reporter positions. Like my role is called audience engagement producer. So I think it's definitely, you know, become more of a focus for newsrooms, because I do realize, like, especially with places wanting to build subscribers and nonprofit newsrooms and in local journalism, they need to have their audience like engaged. So there is a focus on building those relationships and also building that trust. I mean, I think it's just going to grow. And like I said, I think that a lot of journalism was already doing engagement work, but they just weren't calling it that. So I think it's just going to be more prevalent to the forefront of, you know, actually making it a priority for newsrooms.
I definitely remember while I was in the program that I would look at the other kids at CUNY, and you know, they would be like doing freelance gigs and publishing stories, and we were in that slow process of understanding the audience and finding a community and studying our communities, and I was like, wow, I wonder if there's going to be jobs for us, because we're doing something that's completely different. It's not you know, connected with this fast pace that news got in the last few years. And but I remember as soon as we graduated, there were just so many positions for engagement reporters, engagement editors, and community this and community that. And then I looked at my friends who were in the other journalism tracks at CUNY, and they were having a really hard time in finding a job. And one by one in my class, we're all finding something to do, like a part-time here, like we're applying, we're not getting it, but you know, there were opportunities, we're doing interviews a bunch. So it's changing, and it's changing fast. And now people are more familiar with engagement. They know that it's out there. If it hasn't gotten to their organization yet, they know it's going to get there at some point. And one thing that's also changed is how many more tools we have focusing on tracking growth and improving engagement, and how much also those tech companies grew along the way, right? And it's much easier now, for instance, for you to just get a website and give a full analysis of, you know, their traffic, their growth, what they should be doing better, what could be improved on their website. Google just released a tool called News Consumer Insights that, if you guys don't know about it, if you're using Google Analytics, you just opt in, and it couldn't be more like, it's so clear. It's clear as water, the information there. You can get the most like old school traditional journalists. You're gonna send them that link, they're gonna read, and they're gonna understand exactly what the organization could be doing better, because Google really put in the work to make it accessible and for like a general audience, right? They did their audience work, and they made it much more accessible information. So people are more and more talking about traffic, growth, and audience. And like I said before, even if they have a weird opinion what engagement is, they think it's like shooting emails, and but they're, at least they're talking about it. And I feel that in the next 2 years, that's gonna be a lot more common.
I think I'll add something short. I think going off of the conversation about social, I also, for me, it's been really helpful to be able to experiment in social and to encourage our partners to experiment in social when it comes to engagement. With that said, though, I also think it's really limiting. And I worry that some journalists less familiar with engagement will like limit their idea of it to just social. And I think that social is maybe like, I don't know, sometimes I feel like it's like the worst place to do engagement, in a sense of like it, you know, it limits the audience you're reaching. I see a lot of journalists times like put out a call out on their own platforms for a story. And it's like, you can't just pull out a call out on your platform for a story that's about an audience that doesn't follow you. They're not there, and you're reaching a very specific, if you are reaching the audience, you're reaching a very specific part of them, right? Like not really who they are, and you're not going to where they are. You're asking the question where you are. And so I worry about introducing engagement through that lens, although I think it is a really good way to experiment with it. I just like caution doing that without the like kind of like foundational explanation of what honest and like trust building engagement looks like.
Did you want to add anything to that, or?
No, I agree completely. I think they answered it really well.
So let me, if I may, we're also celebrating more than 5 years of what is now engagement journalism. And I'd like to take this opportunity just to hear your feedback. Jake Wasserman mentioned in the chat that, you know, I think it's confirming what you said, Mekdela, about talking to editors and realizing how much you have to bring them up to speed. Well, I do think, Jake, I remember the class we tried to warn you guys that you might be a little ahead of some of the folks you'd be talking to, but yes, I'd be curious to hear from you, blunt answers, two ends of this. What things, skills, viewpoints, whatever, did you learn in the program? Maybe at the time you thought, I don't know why the hell I'm learning this, it was useful or not. But also, very importantly, what did we not teach you that after you're out in the field, you're saying, oh, hell, I wish I'd known this, or I had to learn this in the field? I'm curious both ways to kind of give a picture of the, because Isidore, you already talked about data and things like that. We taught data. Some students say, why are you bothering me teaching me with this? And others get really into it. So I'm curious about not just hard skills, but also soft skills and viewpoints and how the program has related to your career now that you're out there. Give us feedback and be blunt. Mekdela's thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for me, am I good? Is my connection okay?
Yeah. It's a little on and off, but yeah, you're there.
Am I back?
You're back. I
Sorry.
think. Yeah, you're back.
I don't know. Okay, so I think in the program, the main thing that I thought was helpful was definitely learning about and I know this is like through social media, but when we were in Carrie's class, I can't even remember which class it was, and we were helping with the PubliCA project about maternity mortality, and we, did all of our like sleuthing on social media, like connecting with people. And that's when I kind of like fell in love with like Facebook groups and like the importance of them and all of that. And then, as you know, I went on later to work with Spaceship Media, which was all about, dialogue journalism and Facebook groups and connecting with people and building that kind of trust and just seeing how that translates over to actual reporting and newsrooms. So that was one thing that I hold on to dearly and I talk about all the time till this day about social journalism and network there. The one thing I guess I wish I would have known is that, and maybe it's just personally, like all the contract work was great. It was a great time to explore and like try different things, which I loved, but I just like how to navigate that. And I don't know if there's a way to teach that. I don't think there is, because it's all about experimenting. It's all about networking and making, those connections. But that was one thing that I was like, oh, okay, well, is this my life now? I don't know, but it's not, thank God.
B?
Yeah, I would say the most valuable things are just the philosophy of Social J, and also kind of what Mekdela was just talking about, learning from Terry about crowdsourcing. I mean, when Reuters did a call out for the California wildfires, we got more responses from a single local subreddit than from our 23 million Twitter followers. And so that really just goes to show that you need to go where your audience is. And that sort of core lesson is what it's all about for me.
Isadora? Isadora, you have anything?
Yeah. To B's point, just the philosophy, and I came from a traditional journalism background. And Jeff, I bet you tell this story to students still, how nervous I got during that first semester assignment that we had to go to the South Bronx. And I think just like ask people and talk to people, just like do some community recognition and talk to people about a specific issue that we were assigned, and we were not allowed to take notes. Someone else had to take notes if you're asking the questions, because you had to like keep eye contact. And that threw me off so much, and it was so hard for me to understand that. But that's the beauty of it. It was the growing pains of becoming a more audience oriented and engaged journalist. Like you really need to switch your mindset. If you're coming from a more traditional background, you really need to give time, because now it's all about the audience. Like we're not going to survive as an industry. Our jobs are not going to be relevant if we can't find a way to prove to the audience that they need to support the work we do. And we can only prove that if the work we do serve them, right? So until like my parents' generation, they never had to worry about the business side of it. They never had to worry about like how many ads we're running on the newspaper. Is this going to be enough to pay our salaries? Are we going to have like a major layoff thing next summer? Like that was not a thing. And now it needs to be embedded in your work. And it's not a burden. It's something good. You're taking ownership of your work, of the work you do, and what it
Leadership.
represents. Yeah, and imagine like all that we've been going through now with all the misinformation on the pandemic and the elections, and the unhinged politicians and leaders that we have. We are more needed than ever. So we have everything that it takes to prove our point. And this is what Social J taught me the most. I would have wanted to just get more techie and nerdy with the tech side of things, right? And we did cover that in our data class, and we did cover that with Terry and Kelsey. But I would have wanted to do more of that. When I graduated, I asked to sit in the metrics and outcomes class the following semester, because it's just so much that you have to learn. And I was always that person who took pride in not messing with Excel. Like at some point, I just needed to do it, and now you just can't do this work if you don't know how to play with Excel. So I went back for another semester taking that class again. So I would have wanted to have seen more of that. It's nothing that you can learn it on your own. Like I said, there's a lot of tools and resources out there. I've been watching a lot of webinars, so it's fine, with the information is out there, but it would be good to have a more
geek. Mekdela?
Yeah, I think I'm having a hard time thinking about something that I wish I would have learned more of. I think I was really just to say, I moved over to the engagement program from the MA during the orientation, and I would not have survived.
Not that we hypnotized you or anything, not that we stole you, but you chose to make a good decision, we think. But
moved over. I wouldn't have survived in the other one, I don't think. I think I very quickly in the orientation learned, what the foundations of traditional journalism and legacy media looked like. And I felt like I wanted to be in a program that was trying to redesign that, wasn't building off of it. And I was really appreciative of the first community engagement class that we had in the first semester, because it felt like that was the space where we were all learning and reimagining, and not just learning from journalism, but learning from other disciplines. And that was essential for me. I think what I've learned most in engagement journalism has come from organizers. And that, to me, the fact that was critically cited when we were learning those things, and that those guests were brought in, was super, super essential and important for my growth in the program.
Is there anything else just building off that? Because we've had a question in the chat about advice for people that are just beginning in engagement. And I mean, some of these things that you've just mentioned are obviously things that we teach in our skills you need, but anyone want to add anything to that, since we've had that question come up?
I would say in a college newsroom in particular, which I think was the question, and to just clarify one of my previous answers, it's to do engagement work outside of social. It's to try new story forms. It's to talk to people in person, do events, do pamphlets, do any kind of type of engagement work that you can think of that maybe even hasn't been done. Because when you're starting out, and when you're especially doing student work at the Newmark School or elsewhere, that's the time when you really get to try things out. And that's the number one skill that an engagement journalist needs, is curiosity and creativity.
And I'll add, I think Isadora brought this up before, is that, with engagement work and reporting, like B said, it's all about the in-person, but then also it's going to take some time. It's going to take some time to build up those relationships. It's going to take some time for those sources to, come back to you and you be their main person. That's the one thing I think with engagement is really important, is that once you build that trust with people, you'll be their go-to person. They're going to remember you. If they have any scoops or anything, they'll say, oh yeah, Isadora checked on me when, she wasn't even working on a story. So let me give her this information. So I think that kind of the long term, or the, playing the long game in journalism, engagement is really important.
One thing I also, it's I mean, not a paradox, but in the end, the reason why we're doing this, it's because we want to generate also more revenue for newsrooms, because we want the, the business to be sustainable. And if you have this, I wouldn't say it's a transactional thing, but to my point earlier, when, as a journalist coming from, this old school of reporting, being anguished because can't take notes, this comes from a place in which I'm a reporter. I just want to get what I need from this person, and then I'm never going to see them again. So I need my notepad. Like, there's not going to be a second chance. And now, for instance, I totally think that became like, it's a natural thing now. Like, I don't need to write anything down. I just want to bond with you right now. I want you to know that I'm really interested in this topic and you can trust me. And we're gonna have another conversation another time. And once we're all done, like you said, like Lexi said, like, I'm gonna reach out and, how you doing? And with the thing with Retro Report, applying to Retro Report, we're always like doing reporting on issues that are kind of like overlapping, right? It's racial disparities, it's inequality, it's how, vulnerable communities are being affected by the pandemic, and how that's, connected to things that happened in the past, and it shows that, we're just in a like doomed to like repeat history because things are not done differently. So it's good that you bring this new approach to dealing with human beings, because you want them to know that you're there for the long haul, because you need them to be there for the long haul.
We just do to kind of follow up on that, because B mentioned how being in school is a good time to be creative. And I wonder if we have some great questions on the chat, but just do almost like a lightning round where you share one of your kind of a brief summary of one of your most favorite creative projects, because I know all of the folks we invited have done stuff that, like, it isn't something that you quote unquote think of when you think of traditional journalism, but it was so amazing. Just to give people that aren't as familiar with your work just a quick idea of like something exciting that they maybe haven't even thought about yet. Whoever wants to go first. I don't know, Mekdela, whatever.
Isadora, I constantly point not only to the story about your notebook, but also the story of you using the theater of the oppressed as journalism, and people telling the ends of their own stories. That blows people's minds, probably, to say, oh yeah, that's what's possible. So I think that's what Carrie is asking of all of you. What are the things you've done that wouldn't have been considered traditional journalism, but that met journalistic ends?
Right. Mekdela, you're saying something?
No, go ahead. Go off of that, because I want people to know what that was.
Okay.
If that's what you want to talk about, you can talk about something else.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So what I did with my capstone, since I was reporting on, specifically the domestic violence and intimate partner violence issue in immigrant communities, specifically the Brazilian community, I came into my third semester thinking that, I really wish I could do a documentary or a podcast. Like, as a journalist, it's really something I want for my resume, something that I really want to like learn these skills better and use this to improve myself. But then after a year of, social journalism, like, I couldn't bring myself to do that, because I knew it had to be something that would serve the community. In my community, like, they didn't have time to listen to it's not right now people are listening to more podcasts, but like a year ago, they're not doing that. The community was not doing that. And watching a documentary, if you're suffering violence at home, like, how are you gonna like open your computer and watch a documentary about domestic violence? Like, your perpetrator is right there. He's going through your phone. He knows what you're looking at. So I really, and it was also important to know the work that Alan Arthur had done with the incarcerated community, because I have a theater background. He also has a theater background. At some point, I think we came to this point of like realizing that, okay, I'm a journalist. I have all these tools and skills, and I know how to like create all these like traditional products associated with journalism, but that won't do for this community. Now I have to come up with something. And as a communicator, and I'm an advocate of that, as a communicator, your responsibility is to communicate things effectively, right, to people who need your information. And why are we stuck with the old ways of, like, why are we stuck with the newspaper? Why are we stuck with the website, with the podcast, with the documentary, the news segment? We can do whatever we want as long as we follow, as long as we, live by the rules of journalism and fair reporting. You can do whatever you want. So I developed a forum play, which comes from a methodology called Theater of the Oppressed, in which you develop with the community a play about an issue that they're living, they're experiencing, and then you perform that play back to the community. And then as a moderator, you ask people about what they thought, what could be different, and then you invite folks to come from the audience and replace actors in the scene to try to change the outcome, because it's almost like a bystander training. And it was a success. It really was. The pandemic ruined everything, but the reality is everybody in the community was talking about that one event I did at CUNY that had 60 people. Everybody was hitting me up. I had people in Boston calling me like, are you guys gonna come here? People in Miami would like, oh, I heard about your project. Like, are you? And it's just a testament to what the great things that can come when you really look into your community and you focus on them. And what do they need? They need a safe space that they can go. Their partners are not gonna be suspicious about it. They're going to meet a friend. They're going to the supermarket. Lie. They're going to a forum play. They're gonna be with a bunch of women who are also experiencing violence or know about it. They're gonna be reintegrated in the community. They're gonna have a safe space to even practice standing up against a scene or something that happens. So that's what they needed, and that's what I delivered. And it was great that the program embraced that and allowed me to do that. And I'm very happy I didn't do a podcast. So Mekdela.
So is Joe.
Yeah, I talk about that a lot too, as an example of what journalism can look like in this program. For me, one of the things that was exciting for me was working on the Open Newsroom project. And I could talk about that for a while, but I think the main point was that we brought people together in person to talk about their dissatisfaction with the news, what they were seeing, how it wasn't serving them, rebuilding trust there, but also learning from them how they were already sharing information in their communities, and what news could learn from their information sharing practices. And then what was exciting was to see that information sharing was happening in those meetings themselves. So as a journalist, I felt really excited about the fact that I could just be a facilitator and like a framework builder. And then folks could be sharing information within that framework at an event like that. And then separately, for my practicum, worked with food justice leaders in Brooklyn and learned that there was a lot of room for them to share information more within their communities, for their communities to know that these like food access points and community centers were available to them. And for them, a lot of what they told me about how they were dissatisfied with the way that news was serving them was that they felt a lot of times that folks would come in, learn from them, and then take the information out of the community, and then they wouldn't see it again. So it wasn't being shared within their community themselves, it was being shared to the outside world, and it wasn't serving them. And so I developed a project to basically help share information in the community by posting portraits of the food justice leaders on the walls of their community with information about the work that they did, and then like map those points with the points of the food access points in their neighborhoods. And I'm excited to potentially continue working on that. COVID also ruined my plans, but I'm excited to continue working on that in the fall.
I can go. So my practicum was technically a series of crowdsourced articles about loved ones of the incarcerated, but I think the real product was this network of people who had family members in prison that I helped build for the Marshall Project that they still rely on for stories. But I did other projects like crowdsourced voter guide to the Queen's District Attorney race that I handed out on Rikers Island. I crowdsourced food diaries from people in prison and turned that back into a zine that I sent to people who are incarcerated with some service journalism in there. I did a newsletter course for the Marshall Project to introduce people to the biggest concepts in criminal justice, and a bunch of other projects that failed, but really looking at all the different ways that we can get information about the justice system to the many different groups that are affected by it.
So my project was not that cool as any of these. So while I was in the program, I think that like the most significant thing about my time there was the fact that I actually came in with a totally different idea of what I was going to do. My approach to the journalism was like, you know, the meeting in person, going to conferences, like Isadora said, like not going just with a notebook and just having conversations with people. And that really just changed the focus of my work. And so I came into the program wanting to focus on formerly incarcerated people and entrepreneurship. But it changed eventually to focus on formerly incarcerated women, because I learned through all of those approaches and talking to people that was a community that needed the most help re-entering society, whether it was housing issues or, you know, getting their children back, things like that. Something that I didn't think about at all. So I did have a failed project that I did some work on. That was kind of cool. I just never launched it. I was working on creating a online directory basically of these resources, because there was a resource for it, but it was only in print and only like in a PDF form. I wanted it to be like interactive, and it was kind of cool. It just never launched, but that's fine. But after the program, I did work at Spatial Media, which I mentioned before, and that was like my first experience with actual engaging with an audience, and that's why I saw how you can create a community, an online community that can influence reporting. And so from this group, it was about 500 women talking about politics, life, all of that. You know, we wrote stories. I actually worked with Christine, who was on the previous panel. We worked at Spatial Media together. And it was a conversation, dialogue journalism again. It was about conversations that influenced reporting. So yeah, I think that answered the question.
Well, Lex, I also quote you all the time, Lexi. When you and Christine came back to class,
yeah,
it was really striking how you had learned and developed one of the most important skills for today, which was helping communities have informed and productive conversation. Mm-hmm. Right? And you had a methodology for that. You turned that into an expertise. Yes. If you want to talk about what engagement journalism is in the end, it's about helping communities have informed and productive conversation, even and especially if they're in conflict. Mm-hmm. Right? So that project of Spaceship produced something that in the moment had a much higher value, I think. And I imagine those are skills you're still using.
Definitely. I mean, as far as like with what I do today, I do like some comment moderation and all of that, like where I don't actually engage, but the skills that I took from Spaceship, learning, you know, like what toxic language is, even if it's not like super inflammatory, like, oh, that's not a good comment. Let's, you know, like, let's do something with that. And then also at Spaceship, it was about engaging in productive conversation. So whereas if you saw people getting in a conflict, it was asking the right questions, encouraging them to ask questions instead of just like commenting to reply, like wait and listen. It's about the listening aspect. Yeah. So yeah, so that was very informative for my journalism moving forward. It was just a great experience. So and I learned a Spaceship through social journalism, well now engagement. So thank you.
Carrie?
Yeah, I'm sorry we didn't get to like all the questions in the chat. We can try to squeeze a couple in here quickly. I think someone asked a little bit about what kind of the day-to-day is like of engagement journalism. Does anyone want to kind of give us a quick picture of what that looks like?
Mine is a little all over the place. And I think it's very, just because of the nature of the job, I'm working with several producers. We're working on different stories that have different audiences or in different stages of production, stories that some of them you can squeeze in like a crowdsourcing element, an engagement element to it, and stories where I meet them halfway through, and then we're trying to come up with a way to, create a conversation around that piece when it comes out. So can we reach out to some organizations? Maybe they will be interested in showing this video to their audience. So it depends on what's going on. What's the video that's coming up in the near future, and the strategies are different for the video. So it depends. It really depends. Someone asked about analytics and creation of content. Like I said, that analytics, I try not to be a slave of that, just because you need to give time until your efforts reflect into data that you can really take into account. You can't start, I'm going to start something on Instagram, and then, after the first week, it's like, no, that doesn't work. Like, you have to give it time. So I tend not to look that much at analytics, but I do look a lot at analytics before coming up with the strategy, so it can inform what I'm doing. And then I follow up like weeks or months later, depending on it.
Else want to add anything real quick?
Yeah, I agree. Like, the nature of the job is that it looks like a lot of different things. For me, it's sometimes one-on-one calls with our newsroom partners, talking to them about their needs, the issues that they're dealing with, what resources they're looking for, the stories that they're coming up with, and then trying to, encourage them to thread engagement through all those things. And then sometimes it's work for us as an organization to reach our journalists who engage with us. So we do a lot of events and panels and create resources like story guides and such. And so it's working engagement through those lines, and asking questions in our newsletters and on social about what the journalists need to encourage deeper and more urgent climate stories. And then, yeah, and also it's, I also manage a social account, so it's sharing across social every single day, and learning about what folks are talking about there as well, and feeding that back to our team.
All right, well, I think we're coming to the end. We could talk like for a really long time. See, this is what, when Jeff and I are always like, don't even listen to us, just go talk to our alumni. They're much smarter than us. I mean, isn't that like fundamentally obvious after today? But thank you all like so much for joining us. It's so good to see your faces and to let you tell everyone else how awesome you are. So yeah, cool.
And to you four and to all of the alums who are watching, I love you guys. Thank you for all the work you do.
Oh,
Keep it up.
too. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.